Mine are natural.
Welcome everybody to our last session of day 1 at Print 18.
You mean there are 2 more days to go?
There are, Mr. Romano, there are. And we will persevere, as they say.
I see.
I am sitting next to somebody who probably needs no introduction, but just in case he does, this is Mr. Frank Romano, print historian, print legend. My favorite thing is that you testify like for the FBI and stuff. That's really fun. Like he knows something's counterfeit by the font. He's like, that font wasn't in existence when this thing, that was a great story. This guy's got good stories. I really bonded with Mr. Romano, however, at the Museum of Printing, which
in
was
Haverhill, Massachusetts.
in Haverhill, not Haverhill, however I pronounce it. My apologies. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to explore the Museum of Printing with Frank Romano in his own museum. But guess what? It's not unique to me. Apparently, you do it with a lot of people.
Of course.
If they just go up there. So maybe you can just, I mean, there's no way to briefly summarize your history in print, but maybe tell people what you're doing today and how the museum came about.
First of all, by the way, I am the oldest person involved with this show. I am the only person you met who was at every Print and Graph Expo show since 1968. 50 years. And a lot of what I've tried to put in this museum is called the Museum of Printing. It was founded 40 years ago. The Boston Globe was getting out of hot metal printing, and I went to the publisher, Mr. Taylor, and I said, shouldn't we save some of this stuff? And so he supported us, and we found warehouses and stored it all. And then in 1995, we found a home in North Andover, Massachusetts, put some of the stuff there. Then we moved about 3 years ago to Haverhill, Mass. And it's a little gem of a museum with not only old letterpress presses, but a phenomenal array of typewriters, which, by the way, are coming back. We sell some of them that are refurbished, and they sell immediately. It's amazing. We also have a phenomenal array of early computers. I have the first Macintosh. By the way, one of the things
Mr. Steve Jobs gave you, didn't he?
That's right, because I did work with Steve.
I mean, Mr. Romano leaves little details like that out, like, oh, I have the first Macintosh that Steve Jobs handed me.
By the way, Deborah came up one day with me, and I rented a car, and I said, we have to pick something up. I'm not going to tell you what it is. And so she helped me lug this box into the museum and unpack it, and it was an Apple Lisa. That was the predecessor to the Macintosh. Some of you.
It was the Lisa, and I touched it, and I was like, oh my God, I cannot believe I'm touching this thing. Actually, it's kind of like touching you. It's absolutely incredible to believe that you have access to things so historically and so historically awesome.
Yeah, the other day we got in a Xerox 914. That was the first copying machine ever, 1959. I was a key operator on it when I worked at the Mergenthaler Linotype Company in Brooklyn. And it came with a fire extinguisher because every now and then it would burst into flames. They called that a feature, by the way. And the fire extinguisher was called a scorch eliminator. But we actually have a Xerox 914. We have the only collection of photographic typesetting machines in the world. How many of you ever worked with photo typesetting?
I think I didn't. Did you have to develop it and then you cut it out and pasted it down?
And you pasted it down.
Yeah, I when I first started, that was there.
Okay. So I've protected all of that. I also have a library of 6,000 books about the printing industry. Some of them are very interesting. I have the original Baskerville Bible from 1762. That's where he designed the typeface that you all know. How many use Baskerville? That's where the font came from. So it's been an interesting ride, and I'm glad Deborah and a number of other people have gotten a chance to see this museum because my whole life is now in it, if you will. And again, we're trying to preserve the past because our memories go so fast. And if you think about it, many of the technologies that were introduced in 1968 don't exist anymore. That was the first show, by the way, to show an offset press in operation, a web offset press in operation. It was the first show where there was no hot metal equipment. It was all photo typesetting. It was a change in the whole industry. 68 was interesting because it was going to be the first show of the modern era. And 6 months before the show, in June of 68, McCormick Place burned down. And they decided they still wanted to run the show, so they used the old amphitheater, which was near the stockyards. And at that time, there was still stock in them. There was no air conditioning in the hall. It's June now in Chicago. And so this aroma would come in through the windows, which were all left open. And these giant flies could be coming in. It was an amazing event. Now, everyone probably doesn't remember that event, but they remember what happened a few months later at the Democratic Convention in Chicago in 68 with the rioting. And it was held in the same building that Prince 68 was held in. So it was 68 was an important year. And by the way, there were like only a handful of hotels at that time. I mean, we had guys.
I think I'm staying in one of them, Mr. Romano, just so you know.
So
really am.
It was an
Mama
amazing
made a
show.
hotel joke. You would have appreciated it.
And I was 27 years old. And I was the advertising manager for a company called Visual Graphics. If you grab any one of the magazines that has a picture of half a person on it, go to the last page. You'll see a picture of me from 1967.
I saw a picture of you from your first time at the print. No, it was Drupa. I think maybe your first Drupa the other day.
Yep.
So it was circulating with. You had a beard and a mustache. You looked very Italian, by the way. Shocker there, Mr. Romano. It's so interesting at your museum because, I mean, there's all this amazing letterpress equipment there that could have been used to print so many important things over time. And I know that you're very involved in students, having students come to the museum. How do they embrace what they're looking at? Do they understand the historical value of the print industry in the world and the development of communication?
No, I have to tell them that. I host tons of school groups. I come in during the week. We schedule them. Grade schoolers, high schoolers, college students, red hat ladies, homeschoolers. Oh, a lot of homeschoolers. I was really surprised how many of them. And what I start out with is I talk about type and fonts. Because, you know, that's the one common denominator we all have. We all use type in some way. In the old days, that was the province of graphic designers and printers. The average person, if they dealt with fonts, it was Pica or Elite on their typewriter. So I start with fonts, and I start by showing a slide with Mark Zuckerberg's signature on it. Many of these kids, they know Zuckerberg. They know Steve Jobs. And I tell them how I was involved as an expert witness on a forged contract that involved Mark Zuckerberg. So I immediately have their attention. And then I tell them the history of fonts by the people who were involved with the fonts. Who John Baskerville was, who Caslon was, who designed Helvetica. His name was not Helvetica, by the way. And once I've got them their interest, because now I'm dealing with something they generally know, then I can bring them into how it was done. Show them the presses, show them the typewriters, show them the photos. Now they're interested, and what's happening now is they're coming back for second and third times to get more involved.
Really?
And so it's really how you motivate the student, how you motivate that young person to get interested. If you dealt with it just as an academic thing, they're not into it. You got to tell them the story and show them how it works and what it does. And I'm finding a renewed interest in young people and the printing industry.
This is probably a crazy question, but I've asked it to Mr. Landa, and I would like to ask it to you. Is printing an art or a science?
Yes.
Well, if it can't be both, which one is it?
No, it has to be both.
Well, in my little game, in my little booth, it could only be one. So if you had to pick one, Mr. Expert Witness, which is it?
Well, I would tell the lawyers I can't answer that question. And that's a perfectly valid, because
It is
here's
a
your
valid
problem.
answer. Damn it, he got me on a legality.
Here you go. Your problem is that art is something that involves creativity. And I can be creative with type. I can be creative with printing in the way I do it, the colors I use, the arrangement of the type. But then I need to know the underlying science, the mechanics of how to print. Whether I do that with letterpress or screen printing or stone lithography, whatever it may be. By the way, I'm creative with my HP desktop printer and the things I can do with that. So it's a combination of both, and trying to force it into one is unfair.
Nana, nana, nana. Am I allowed to? Is that an official hashtag? Nana, nana, nana.
Actually, I've used that answer before.
But that was actually a very fair answer, because the way I prefaced the question, you can't answer it, but you did, and I accept your answer because I do also believe it's both. But let me ask you this then: does one push the other more? Is that a fair question?
Yes, that's a fair question. And the one that pushes it more is the fact that we moved into digital printing. And we can do things today we could never do before. Look at many of the machines on the floor here, the digital machines. They're all doing some form of embellishment. MGI, the new Xerox Iridesce, Scodix, Ricoh. They're all adding, beyond CMYK, they're adding phosphorescence, fluorescence, gold, silver, all kinds of special effects. Because print is no longer just black and white. Print is unbelievable, because that's what wins printing competitions. That's what gets people's attention. And so at this show, you can see a major trend toward more embellishment in print.
And that's actually a perfect segue, because who better to describe some of the technologies on the show floor that shouldn't be missed or should at least be investigated than Mr. Romano?
Well, they all should be investigated, because this is the smallest print show ever, by the way. In the history of this show, this is the smallest one. So you have no excuse but to go and visit every booth. Now, some of them won't matter. Some of them you don't care about how things get bound, because, again, you don't need to know what the machine does. You just know that it will do what you want it to do. I came up with a piece for our museum that folded twice, so it became a fold-out. And the binder that they normally use in the printing company I was with said that they couldn't handle that kind of a fold. So I had to find somebody that could. So you need to know a little bit about the mechanics of binding. That's fine. You need to know a lot about how the machine prints. I don't care if it's toner. I don't care if it's inkjet. I don't care if it's lithography. Whatever it is it going to do what you want it to do? Now, the problem here is there are no offset presses. The RMGT used to bring a Ryobi press, and this is the first show in maybe 10 years where they haven't brought a press. So no offset lithography. If you go back only 10 years at this show, printing presses were the dominant device. Everybody had a big printing press and all the things that went with it. Also at that time, every paper company on earth was here. Now you see only a handful of the paper companies. So this has become a digital show in every way. And so the companies scattered throughout are involved in some kind of printing with droplets of, whether it's powder toner, liquid toner, thermal inkjet, drop on demand inkjet, whatever it may be in that regard. These are all the technologies we have to deal with. Each does its particular job, and you have to decide if it's good for what you want to do for your customers. So there are no easy answers anymore. It used to be very simple. Buy a Heidelberg offset press. That was it. Today, there are many more choices to deal with.
Have you seen any marketing technology on the show floor that interests you in any way, shape, or form?
Yes. Go to the booth RMGT. There's a large poster, and there's a picture of me on it. That's not why it's important. Have them give you a demo. They will pull out either their phone or an iPad, and they will not scan it. They will just hold it up in front of it. And you will watch me come alive, step out of the poster, and in 3D talk about the future of print. That's more than augmented reality. That's real reality. It's an app called Zapper, and it doesn't look like a barcode. It doesn't look like a generic code. It looks like something else, but it looks at the entire image. And I remember when they came to shoot me behind with the green screen, and I had no idea what they were doing. And they come back with this sheet of paper that's printed, and they scan it, and all of a sudden I come alive. And I'm saying, wow, this is fantastic from a marketing point of view for this reason. It involves print. You can do all these posters at a supermarket, at a store, And then when someone has a question, they just go over and zap it, and suddenly someone talks about it. And they talk about it as a real person, not like a voice or a video, because they're coming out as a three-dimensional, as though it's a real person stepping out of the poster. RMGT, right down the hall.
So it's awesome to go there and get a 3D experience of you describing the future of print, but we've got you right here, Mr. Romano, like a live flesh and blood. What is...
Actually, I'm a hologram.
Okay, so I got to go talk to the poster then instead of you. What out there is the future of print? What should they be? They in the audience, they on the cameras, they on the internet out there watching. What is the direction they should go to based on your professional opinion?
We are moving into the future at 1 second per second. If you calculate that, that's just normal time. Because all the technologies out there keep evolving. In 1968, there was no digital printing. The first copying machine was just about to come on the marketplace. In fact, you didn't see a copying machine at this show until '72, which was the next print show that evolved. So technology keeps changing. So the future of print is really the evolution of every one of the machines on this floor.
Yeah.
Some of them will succeed and some of them will fail. Now that's the problem, is determining which ones will be there as we move into the future. Because it's changing so fast. How many used to own an offset press or still own an offset press? And remember that offset press would last you 20 years, 30 years, or even more? How many have one that's 30 years old?
Up to...
Where do you find operators? You're in Portugal. Okay, so you're okay. You import them from Brazil.
Oh.
Well, no, because they speak Portuguese.
No, and I understand, yeah.
I think anybody would get my jokes. In any case, today, a modern offset press will do the work of 3 or 4 of those older presses. And really, that's what you should be investing in. You also have to get into digital because runs are getting shorter and special effects are getting more prevalent. And so you need digital. Now the question is, should it be roll fed? Should it be sheet fed? Should it be toner? Should it be inkjet? So those are the hard decisions. But the future is here because that's going to hold us for another 10 years or so. And then it's all going to change again and again. So if you've been in this industry like I have for over 50 years, actually going on 60 years right now, you've seen all these changes. And all these machines that started out so great and people made money with them, and suddenly they were in a scrap heap. I mean, no one has a machine from the old photo typesetting era. That lasted for 40 years and then was gone, and those machines could never be used again. Hot metal machines, letterpress machines, you can still use them. They're mechanical. Anything that was electronic, forget it. Not going to happen. Just finding the electronic parts. We had at the museum, we had a Vandercook proofing press, a letterpress proofing press. And it was a modern version of the Vandercook. It had an electronics board in it that allowed it to do certain things. And it didn't work anymore. So one day someone came into the museum and I said, "Are you an electrician?" And they said, "No, I'm an electrical engineer." I said, "Just what I need." And he went back and he helped us troubleshoot it, and there was one capacitor. That was the whole problem. Now, does anybody here know what a capacitor is?
I know what a flux capacitor is.
There you go. That's right, if you want to go back in
Future.
time. And so we were able to find on the internet, we bought 3 of them because we figured if it went once, it'll go again. And we got the thing running. This was the biggest Vandercook out there. Finding those parts, getting it troubleshooted and finding those parts was the hard job. So figuring out how to use old technology is getting harder. So old technology is not going to lie around anymore. It's going to be gone. And when it's gone, something's going to replace it. And you're going to have a limited time to make money with it before the next thing comes out to make money with. And I'm sorry to say it, but that's the world we're in.
We had another panel a little while ago, and it was about the productization of print to help printers understand that there's opportunities to create printed products and just kind of try to get themselves out of the commodity situation. With that just being the premise of an idea, what are your thoughts around that?
Okay, don't sell products. Well, think about it. We can divide everything into certain products, right? So a book is a product, is it not?
Yes.
All right. I was at the Authors Expo in New England a few weeks ago. It was 100 tables of self-published authors. I was a speaker there, and I said, you all wouldn't exist without on-demand printing. Now, convincing people to get into on-demand printing was a hard job in the early days. Howie Fenton and I wrote the first book on it in the late 1980s. And so a little while ago, I'm sitting to rest because my leg is giving me grief, and a young lady sits down because she's having trouble with her leg, and we start chatting. She's from Phoenix, and she owns a company that does books on demand. It's a little company, husband and wife. They have roll-fed inkjet, and they're doing phenomenally well. And she says, we've gone way beyond books. We're not selling books. We're selling a future. We're selling someone's history, someone's romance novel, someone's work. And that's what they want to help us to help get produced so that they can market it. So they don't think of it as a book. They think of it as their particular publication, whatever it may be. So I have a whole presentation I do on printed products, and many printed products have literally gone away. I mean, think about it. How many still get an invoice or a statement every month? Normally it's electronic today, right? How about the check market? At one time, Deluxe Check had a printing operation in every state in the union. Now they have barely one. So it's not the printed product, it's the problem you want to solve with printing. And that's what the salesperson should be helping you to do. But printing salesmen don't know how to do that. The way they sell is, need any printing today? Because they think that all of you only compete on price, that you only buy on price. No! You want to solve a problem. Help me solve that problem, whatever it may be, by using print.
I just love, like, when you're finished, I know you're finished, and you give me a space to ask another question. Something tells me you've done a few interviews in your time. I'm not too sure.
Oh, you know who I was interviewed by the other day?
Who?
Walter Isaacson. He wrote the book of Steve Jobs, the biography.
Oh, cool.
He did Einstein. Yeah, he has some kind of a radio show where he talks about technology, and I happen to know the guy who invented the dot matrix printer.
Oh, just happened to.
So it was fantastic. The only thing is everything they do is not spontaneous, and I don't like to work that way. They had all the questions in advance. They had everything pre-planned. Not only did I do it over the internet, but they sent someone in to record me on where I was because they wanted to be absolutely safe. It was an amazing experience with someone really detail-oriented on doing an interview. I prefer yours.
Well, I'm glad you do, because I'm proud to say I've done no preparation whatsoever for this interview other than attending the museum with you and being I know I mention this a lot, but when I first started in advertising, my cousin Amy worked there too, and I didn't really know much about what I was doing. And she handed me the Pocket Pal, and she said, this is everything you will ever need to know about what you're doing. And who would ever think 25, 30 years later, I'm sitting next to the gentleman who wrote that book and who saved me, who taught me through osmosis, or not even knowing we each other existed, and then you got me through years of my career. I mean, I didn't know what a JPEG was. I didn't know what RGB was. I mean, everything's in that book, so it is really amazing. But to tie this back to the Museum of Printing, because this panel, not panel interview. My apologies.
I'm big enough to be a panel.
I call the legacy of print, and it's not just because you are the one of the legacies of print, certainly in the world, but also because of the history that you are saving at the museum. And I'd like you to address the people out there on how they can get involved, how they can support, how they can tell other people how they can get involved and support in any way that you can, reach out and communicate with them as well.
The Museum of Printing, it's museumofprinting.org. There's a website. We're also on Instagram.
It's on the slide.
Twitter, Facebook, sign language, smoke signals. We've been around for 40 years with no endowment. This place started on a wing and is still on a wing and a prayer. We're all volunteers. No one gets paid. They come in from all over New England. Wednesday is a big day. We're only open on Saturdays to the public, but our volunteers come in and do tours, do demonstrations, etc. So the whole place was organized and run by volunteers. We're getting to the point where we're all in our 70s, and it's getting harder to do that. So the next generation is going to be harder to find who are willing to put in the kind of time we put in, which means we may have to pay them. I know that sounds sad, but that's the way it is. So what we need now is up our fundraising game. So museumupprinting.org, there's a page for donations. If you have the money and can afford it, either join or donate. It would be very helpful. And please come and visit us. Just north of Boston, it's spelled Haverhill, but pronounced Haverhill. Don't even try it with Siri. It won't work. But I trust that when you come, there will be two emotions. One will be awe, and the other will be nostalgia.
There's definitely something in there that anybody in the print industry I worked in advertising and I still saw stuff that I had touched at some point or knew about. The library is absolutely incredible. You have every Pocket Pal, every program from Drupa. There are first edition books in there, as you mentioned. You have that Bible, the Baskerville. Is that what?
That's it.
The Baskerville Bible. That when we were there, the guys were out in the back looking for some parts for one of the, I think, the letterpress machines.
Yeah, people contact us because they're missing the ink disc or the treadle on one of the old Chandler and Price presses or whatever. And sometimes we have presses and parts, and we can give it to them.
It is absolutely a fantastic experience, and if you're a company, you can make a donation and I believe leave some materials or provide some educational materials to the museum that are relevant, of course. And if you're a regular person, Mr. Romano's not asking for $1 million, although he'd like it.
No, don't say that.
He is asking for $1 million. I'm sorry, everybody, but you can, like anything else. This is part of our history too, and every little bit counts. So I would just say, if you want to give back at all because you've learned something from this show, from this event, from Mr. Romano, maybe you thought a blog on Print Media Center was helpful or a podcast, $5, $10, $15 million, museumupprinting.org, and let's save the legacy of print. Mr. Romano, Francesco, grazie, signor.
Thank you all very
everything.
much. Thank you very much, Deb.
Thank you so much.
I think she has $1 million.
She has $1 million.
Yeah,
okay.
I think so.
Thank you so much.
I said